worldwide on the internet. This is OmegaManRadio with Shannon Davis.
Okay. That being said, let's get rolling tonight. Let me get our guest on the line. Cris, do I have you on Skype?
Absolutely. I'm right here. It's great to be back on the show with you.
You're there. And Tom Horn, do I have you on the landline?
Here I am.
Praise God. Gentlemen, great to have you back. It's been a while, and you've got a lot to talk about tonight. But before we go any further, please give out your contact information. And I'm going to start with you, Tom.
Sure. Well, anybody can get a hold of me. My website is RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and it has all the contact information over there.
Excellent. We'll be giving that out throughout the show and talking about the new book. Cris, how can people reach you? Please give out your info.
My website is logosapologia.org. That's LOGOSAPOLOGIA.org.
Excellent. Now, gentlemen, tonight is such a timely broadcast. With the present change taking place at the Vatican, prophecies of Brother Malachi, and a lot of other rumors going around, we need to get to the bottom of it. What's going on at the Vatican? What can we expect? We're going to cover that and a lot more tonight, but I'm just going to throw the mic over to you, gentlemen. Be open mic all night, and why don't you lead off, Tom?
Well, sure. And by the way, also let me say that if anybody doesn't remember Cris Putnam's Logos Apologia, if they can't remember that website, if you just go to Google anytime and type in Cris Putnam, he'll be probably the first one that pops up over there, and you can click through and find his website. Fantastic material over there. I was following Cris for quite some time before he and I even determined to write this book together. Well, Shannon, would you have thunk it? We did your show just 1 year ago now, in which we were talking about the book Petrus, Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, and we were predicting that Benedict was going to step down, which was pretty bold given the fact that no pope has abdicated the throne of Peter in 600 or more years. Christopher Columbus hadn't even set sail for the United States. It was, before that had happened, and so. But that was what we believed, and we wrote it. We've talked about it since. We've blogged about it. Cris has blogged about it on his website. I've wrote about it on Raiders News Update. 3 weeks ago, I did a show with our mutual friend Steve Quayle, and on that show, I said that I believed that the resignation of the Pope was imminent, and that he would not die in office, and that not only would he step down, he'd step down citing health reasons. Well, 2.5 weeks later, he did that very thing, and ever since then, Cris Putnam and I have had a huge amount of demand on our time from media. Him and I both are working like crazy people trying to get the new book, Exo-Vaticana, out. We're going through the typeset today trying to proof it because with the Pope's resignation, it put a lot of pressure on us to get the book out earlier than we had originally scheduled to have it out in the middle or the third week of April. Now everybody wants it a month sooner, and some of these media outlets, they want to have the book by the time the conclave is electing the Pope. So just immense amounts of pressure. But I want to say, Shannon, OmegaMan was really central to what we did. In fact, in the beginning of the book, Exo-Vaticana, we actually mentioned your show, and we talk about how that we came on your show with you and Steve Quayle, me and Cris, and we did that show on Petrus Romanus, and that rocketed to be the #1 blog talk show in the world for a week. And then I came back on, I don't know, a month later or something, because people wanted to know about the alien connection, and that rocketed OmegaMan into the #1 spot for several weeks, as I recall. And that was really what caused Cris and I to believe that there was more than a casual interest on the part of the world in this connection between the coming of Petrus Romanus and what a lot of the Vatican spokespeople, which we can talk about tonight, have been out there saying in recent years about astrobiology, extraterrestrial intelligence, and doing a great deal of work, as people are going to learn in our new book, Exo-Vaticana, to prepare for the arrival of an alien savior. But central to kickstarting all of that last year was the OmegaMan program.
Well, gentlemen, it's an honor to have you both back on. Folks, their prediction came to pass. It's documented here on radio tape, and you've got my attention tonight. You know, what's going on over there at the Vatican just doesn't happen. You know, I'm hearing reports of lightning strikes in Rome, you know, rumors of, you know, people, you know, would like to throw this current pope in jail. You know, all kinds of stuff's coming out, and we need to sort through it and find out, you know, what's the truth out here and what's next. And I think that that's going to be central to telling us where we are in the timeline of the last days, because, folks, I believe we're in the Super Bowl, the end times. Cris, what do you have to say as an opening statement tonight?
Well, it's I can't imagine any better circumstances for Tom and I to return to your show a year later. You know, we're talking about the fact that, you know, we kind of went out on a limb last year. We put a book out in April of 2012, and then on pages 57 and 58 of that book, Petrus, Romanus, the final pope is here, we said that we thought the pope was going to step down that month. Now, that's quite a risk. If you think about, you know, if you're trying to preserve the shelf life of your book, you're going to make a prediction like that out of nowhere, something that hasn't happened since the year 1415, and put it and only give your book like a four week shelf life before that prediction fails. And you know, it seemed like it did. And you know, and we didn't come up with that on our own. You know, if you recall, in my investigation of the Malachi prophecy, you know, one of the things that I did, it's one of the things, you know, they teach you to do in seminaries. If you're going to write on a subject, you got to read every book that you can find about it. And that's kind of what I tried to do. And, you know, there was this book by this Jesuit priest, René Thibault, and from Belgium, that I translated from French. And he's the one that named April 2012. I mean, from 5 or 6 different, like, really fanciful calculations. But one of the simplest ones that he did is that he just calculated the average time that a pope was in office. You know, and he just divided the number of years by the number of popes. And he was writing in 1950, and he came over with 11 years. So then he just looked at the Malachi prophecy, and he said, well, there's this many popes left, multiply that number by 11 and add that many years to my date, and he landed right in 2012. So, you know, I put all that on the spreadsheet, and I think the first time I put it online was during your show last year. That's when I actually posted that spreadsheet to my website. Now, of course, 2012 came and went, and, you know, Tom and I guess we were a little disappointed, but, I mean, there's enough material in our book, Petrus Romanus, where I wasn't that worried about it. That was just a small part, but it was a very risky move for us to even talk about that. And, well, it's come to find out that all of that has really been redeemed in a way that I never would have anticipated. When Pope Benedict announced that he was stepping down Monday, February 11th, you know, I went to the New York Times is the one that really had the big article on it. And, you know, I'll just read this little snippet from the New York Times. It says that the resignation was long in the planning, was confirmed by the editor of the Vatican newspaper, who wrote on Monday that the Pope's decision was taken many months ago after his trip to Mexico and Cuba in March of 2012 and kept with a reserve that no one could violate. So, you know, he got back from that trip right at the end of March 2012, right as our book was about to come out. You know, literally, we're talking about a matter of days before April 2012 is when he made the decision. So if he had followed through on what he decided in March 2012, then René Thibault's prediction of April 2012 would have been dead on. Typically, the rule at the Vatican is 15 days between popes before they have a conclave. So how that René Thibault figured that out, I mean, I explain it in our book, but where he was inspired to get that is anyone's guess. But it really did come to pass in a very unexpected way. So I can't imagine any better circumstance to be back on the show with you.
Yeah, let me add to what he's saying there, Shannon. When I read the New York Times, I see something even a little more adamant. Cris tends to be more careful than I am. I put my neck out there on the block a little easier. He's a theologian, and I'm a hype guy, right? So I throw the grenades and then run for my life, and Cris, he's a lot more careful than I am. But if you read that February 11 article, it's titled "A Statement Rocks Rome," so if you want to Google that and look it up, it looks to me like what they're saying is that the Pope actually internally officially resigned in 2012 following March. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, there was only a handful of cardinals that were given the information, and it says it was kept in a reserve that nobody could violate. Well, that's pretty official. In other words, he wasn't just generalizing, I may or may not resign at some point in the near future. This was a reserve. It was like a decision was made that he was going to retire. Furthermore, they immediately started in April. There's a building there on the grounds of the Vatican that the nuns were using, and they started remodeling it into the apartment that he would retire in. So this sounds pretty definitive to me that René Thibault nailed this right on the head, and that internally Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, turned in his resignation, but then he waited till 2013 to make it official. And I also see metaphysical signatures on that, and I'll tell you why. One of the things we talked about on your program last year also had to do with the Zohar. And if you recall, the Zohar also has a prediction in it. But the Zohar calendar, the Jewish calendar, doesn't line up like our Gregorian calendar. It actually started in September, the new moon September of 2012, and ends in the year 2013, this year, in August this year. That is this prophecy. The prophecy mentions the year 5773, and that 5773 timeline ties 2012 to 2013. So when the Pope, when this article in the New York Times, which Cris also found, when he sent that to me, I looked at it and I thought, this is really very strange, because I've thought for some time that some of these cardinals might be following the prophecy of the popes, almost like a road map, if you will. In other words, they're picking popes who could be seen in one way or another as the fulfillment of this prophecy. And it was unique, to say the least, that the Zohar prophecy, which sounds almost identical, by the way, to the prophecy of the popes, in that it predicts the arrival of the Antichrist and the destruction of Rome. And let me read this prophecy from the Zohar. So two things to keep in mind. First of all, the prophecy of the popes would not have been available to these Jewish mystics 700 years ago, because at that time the prophecy of the popes was concealed inside the Vatican archive and had not been yet published, which happened in 1595 when it was first made public in Arnold de Wyon's massive book Lignum Vitae. So it was concealed. And yet 700 years ago, the Jewish mystics prophesied this in the Zohar. They said, in the year 5773, that's 2012, 2013, the kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome. Now let me stop there for a moment. Maybe you guys can correct me, but I don't know of any other event in which either the kings of the world or their ambassadors, the people who stand in their place, would travel to Rome from all over the world. I don't know no time when that would happen other than a conclave, the election of the Pope, and then the inauguration of that new Pope. That's the only time I know when all of the world would send representatives, or the kings of some of these smaller countries would actually travel there. So the kings, it says this, the kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome, and the Holy One will shower on them fire and hail and meteoric stones until they are all destroyed, with the exception of those who will not yet have arrived there. And from that time, the Messiah will begin to declare himself, and around him will be gathered many nations and many hosts from the uttermost ends of the earth, end quote. So you have a 700 2,000-year-old Jewish prophecy that has language that sounds very similar to the prophecy of the popes, in which Rome's also going to be destroyed. And yet, with the Jewish calendar starting in September of our Gregorian calendar in 2012 and ending in 2013, it mystically connects these 2 years in our Gregorian calendar in a way that seems almost identical to what Pope Benedict did by making one thing official secretly and then waiting until 2013 to retire. One final thing I would say is that Cris and I did speculate for many reasons. If you read the book Petrus Romanus, there were lots of reasons that we were focused on March and April of last year as the most likely time when the Pope would step down. But we also said in that book that if he didn't step down in 2012, he would most likely step down in 2013. So we turned out to be eerily correct, but you have to give credit where credit is due to that fascinating book that Cris Putnam found by René Thibault. Now, later tonight, I'll talk about another French book that Cris Putnam found that has to do with the Masonic influence inside the Vatican.
Gentlemen, as you were researching this story, have you received any death threats or any warnings not to continue?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I didn't have to wait to write this book to get death threats. I get stuff all the time in the mail, via email, phone calls. Some of it's been significant enough that I've had to turn it over to authorities. But let me just be clear that we have, wherever I go, and including my residence and the places where I live, we have ways of protecting ourselves. I'll just say it that way.
I can only expect that this has stepped on some people's toes, and there is probably some people that don't want the truth to get out. Now, let me just hypothesize, if I will, if what we're looking at is the final pope, and I believe that's the conclusion you drew, whereas you had the Peter, who would be considered the Apostle Peter, the first pope. This guy is the epitome of the anti-pope, right? If Petrus Romanus is going to be the final pope, the false prophet, if you will, does that mean that somewhere on this planet tonight, the Antichrist has had dinner and he could conceivably even be tuning into this program?
I'll take that one. Yeah, we definitely do think that this final pope, if this prophecy turns out to be a real prophecy, that still remains to be seen. Tom and I have never, said with any degree of certainty that this is, but we think that there are good reasons to take it seriously. It does seem to have predicted future events in pretty remarkable ways in the past, so it seems to have a supernatural fingerprint on it. In case the listeners aren't familiar, the last prophecy in this St. Malachi prophecy for the very next pope says, "In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep in many tribulations. When they are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people." The end. Now, that ending is what captured our attention in the first place, and that's what the big point of interest with this.
Cris, your audio dropped just a little bit. You might want to adjust the microphone.
Okay, that's the point of interest with this prophecy, is that it seems to intersect the book of Revelation in some very interesting ways. It says the city of 7 hills will be destroyed. Tom just talked about, a Jewish Zohar prophecy that says Rome will be destroyed. The book of Revelation, chapter 17, it talks about the great harlot, Mystery Babylon. And, scholars have for centuries seen this as an apostate religious system, and even Catholic Bible commentators have identified this with the Church of Rome. And that's because it really identifies the city of Rome within the chapter in a very clear way. In verse 9 of chapter 17, it says there's a 7-headed beast. Now, it talks about the 7 heads, but they have a dual aspect. It's not either or. It's actually both and. If you read the language, it says the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and also, and then it goes into this thing about the kings. But so it has 2 aspects. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Now, the very last verse of chapter 17, it says, the woman that you saw is that great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Now, in biblical hermeneutics, the general rule that we start from is the author's original intention. Now, Mystery Babylon might encompass a lot of things. It might encompass the apostate church in America and worldwide. But when John says that city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, when he's writing this text in 90 A.D. at the peak of the Roman Empire, there really was no other candidate for a city that had dominion over the kings of the earth. So John had Rome in mind. And that reference to the 7 hills, it's really transparent that he's speaking of Rome. So, and then in the next chapter, we see this system judged and destroyed by God, which is, intersects with the ending of the Malachi prophecy, with this extra biblical Jewish prophecy that we're talking about. And there's several other prophecies that talk about Rome being judged in the end times, and I cite those in the book Petrus, Romanus. The Cumaean Sibyl and others actually talked about this event as well. It seems to be, something that mystics have envisioned over the centuries, in a myriad of different ways. The prediction that Rome would be judged and destroyed, it just has a rich history within prophetic traditions. So that's where we see this intersecting with biblical prophecy, and then we have this final pope. Now, we talk about Peter the Roman, Petrus Romanus, and, it could be that his name is Peter, and there are some rather interesting candidates that have the name Peter, either within their name or their first name. But, Tom and I have been pretty clear that, this could just be an inference from their claim to apostolic succession from Peter. And, just as a note, you mentioned that at the beginning, and I devoted a chapter in the book Petrus Romanus to kind of undermining that claim, because I don't think that Peter was ever the bishop of Rome. I don't think that there's any evidence for it that's very compelling. In fact, I think the New Testament actually disproves it. If you look at the book of Romans, which was written to Rome, at the end of that book, Paul greets about 29 people. Now, this was exactly the time when the Catholic Church would say Peter was the bishop of Rome. Paul doesn't mention Peter. He mentions 29 other people. The book of Acts, Paul ends in Rome. If you read the book of Acts, you don't see Peter after the chapter 15 at the Jerusalem Council. The book ends with Paul arrested in Rome. Peter's not mentioned. This is the time when the Catholic Church says that Peter was the bishop of Rome. It doesn't make any sense that he wouldn't be in the book of Romans or at the end of the book of Acts. So I don't accept their claim of apostolic succession from Peter, but they believe it. So that could be the origin of Peter.
I would have to add on to that. I agree with you, because isn't it the Apostle Paul who said, I was sent to the Gentiles and Peter to the Jews? So why they decided to go with Peter, I don't know. But clearly, if you ask the average, person on the street, Catholics, they'll say, yeah, our church was built on the rock. That's Peter. And, I've had them tell me that also, although I can't, find the proof of that in the Word of God. But that be as it may, looking back at these prophecies of Brother Malachi, he predicted that there would be a final pope, and I think he even numbered the pope. What was this to be, like the 118th, the 119th would be the final one?
112th.
The 112th, excuse me, okay. And what I kind of found interesting, Tom and Chris, is that this prophecy was in such great detail that he even described the coats of arms of these coming popes. Is that right?
Yeah, in some cases he does. Again, Chris wrote basically the chapter in our book where he was showing in what ways sometimes it was a coat of arms, sometimes it was a motto. For instance, on the accuracy of the prophecy of the popes, look at just the last 4 popes. You had Paul the Sixth. The prophecy of the popes described him as florum, or flower of flowers, which clearly matched his heraldry. Then you had Pope John Paul. The prophecy of the popes described him as de mediate lune. I can't talk. From the midst of the moon. And, of course, he's famous for the shortest papacy in history. Only lived 33 days as a pope. Widely believed he was poisoned. We could go into that, and we do talk about that in the book. But his motto, for his motto in the prophecy of the popes, he was born in the diocese of Beluna. Luna is Latin for the moon. He ascended to the papacy on the precise day of a half moon in its waning phase. So there were things that correspond perfectly to matching him up with the midst of the moon. The next pope was John Paul II. The prophecy of the popes described him as coming from de labora solis, or from the labor of the sun, and that's a prophecy. If you watch you can go to YouTube and type in something like I forget what it's called, Petrus, Romanus, Benedict resigns, or something like that, and you'll see a 5-minute segment from the History Channel last year on which Cris Putnam was on, and he's talking about this prophecy, how John was born during a partial solar eclipse. He was born during a rare hybrid eclipse, or he was buried during a hybrid eclipse. So there were two cases in which he's fantastically fulfilled from the labor of the sun. And then, of course, you have Pope Benedict, who was described as Gloria Olivae, or the glory of the olives, which is interesting because he's not an Olivetan priest, and yet he took the name Saint Benedict because the olive branch is a symbol of the Benedictine monk. So that almost seemed to be something he was doing intentionally to show that he would be a fulfillment of the prophecy. One thing I should say right here, too, is much of the media out there right now keeps saying this one line over and over because they realize if they say it enough times that the average person out there that doesn't do much studying will just assume it to be true. And that is, they're saying over and over that the Vatican rejected the prophecy of the popes, that their scholars believe that it was a hoax, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there are some Jesuits that rejected it, but we know there were some Jesuits that believed in it. Furthermore, we know there are some popes who believed in the prophecy of the popes and even went out of their way to align themselves to show that they were the Chris, let me have Chris tell the story. He has a fantastic story about a pope who was even producing a movie to show that he was the fulfillment of the prophecy of the popes.
Yeah, well, there's been several instances in history where we have popes that seem to really have gone out of their way to make it happen. And the one that Tom's talking about is Pius XII, who was pope during World War II. Now, his motto was Pastor Angelicus, so angelic shepherd, the angelic pastor. And, that's a really a hard one to fulfill in any precision kind of way. I mean, how would somebody fulfill that in a way that we would think was supernatural? Just, it's one of those vague ones, that I would almost write off when I was doing my skeptical investigation of this thing. But it turns out that, during the war, he was kind of worried about his self-image. And he produced a documentary film about himself, the daily life of, Pius. And he named the film Pastor Angelicus. And, like the splash screen that starts at the film, it shows, it's big letters, Pastor Angelicus. So it really begs the question if, the Vatican doesn't believe this prophecy, if they're trying to dissuade people from believing it, why is the Pope producing a movie based on the Malachi motto for his papacy? I mean, obviously.
It almost sounds like a Cannes Film Festival, and the popes are hiring PR agents.
Well, there was other ones too. I mean, in the 1958 and 63 conclaves, there's the whole Siri conspiracy where Malachi Martin claimed that Cardinal Siri of Giuseppe Siri of Genoa had actually been elected the Pope, but was forced to step down because he was advised by the Jesuits to do so because they had other people. And, of course, those two conclaves were the ones that gave birth to Vatican II. So there's a lot of conspiracy around that. But what a lot of people don't know is that in 1958, the inevitability of Siri's election was believed so strongly that in Italy, the prophecy of St. Malachi, describing Pius' successor as shepherd and sailor, that's number 107 of the prophecy of the popes, Pastor El Nata, was publicly and in the media attributed to Siri, because the maritime city that had been his lifelong home, where he was born, he was a dock worker, was the most important seaport in the country, the birthplace of Christopher Columbus. And a Genoan newspaper at that time wrote, no one better than Siri could symbolize the motto of Malachi's prophecy of the popes. He is a pastor of the highest virtue, a captain of the ship, born and raised on the sea. So one thing we were able to show was, regardless what some Jesuits and what some writers today would lead you to believe, that the Vatican and its leadership never accepted the prophecy of the popes, we know better than that. As a matter of fact, this might be another thing Chris could address if we want to stay on this topic, and that is that the part of the prophecy of the popes that was actually tinkered with and that caused Chris and I to reject everything prior to 1590 was because one of the cardinals who was trying to get a certain cardinal elected to be the pope, a cardinal by the name of Simon Selly, they tinkered with the prophecy of the popes, changed it to try to make it look like he would be the fulfillment of that prophecy. Well, that kind of activity tells you that there has always been, for hundreds of years, always been a strong belief among the electors, among the College of Cardinals, that there is something supernatural about this prophecy, or it is to be followed as a guideline. But for whatever reason, whatever their belief system is, there is a lot of evidence in the record in which the College of Cardinals has intentionally done things to try to make sure that whoever is elected as Pope can be shown as a fulfillment of this prophecy. Of course, now then that raises the biggest question, since we've reached the final Pope, and so many, including Catholic prophecies, have identified this final Pope as either the false prophet or, at a minimum, an individual who's going to help give rise to the Antichrist. It's going to get real curious now about who's elected in, and certainly all of our eyes for the next 3 weeks are going to be on the Vatican as the cardinals gather now for the conclave that will elect the final Pope.
Chris?
Absolutely. He was talking about the motto that was shepherd and sailor, pastor and nata, John the 23rd, 1958 to 63. There's another interesting story that kind of supports the notion that the cardinals take this prophecy seriously. There was another candidate, another what they call papabile. That's a fancy word meaning you're eligible to become pope. And the way that story goes, he actually rented a boat, and in Rome, they have the Tiber River that runs right by Vatican City there, and with a bridge. He absolutely sailed up and down the river in that boat in front of everybody, so they would see him as the shepherd and sailor. And that was his way of politicking right before that conclave. So obviously there's a cardinal that took it seriously enough to think that it might increase his chances. So there's all sorts of instances of this. I mean, Benedict XVI, when he picked the name Benedict, he made that match. I mean, that's probably the most obvious one of recent of date. But we're talking about, why are all these people in the press trying to debunk it? I mean, the Huffington Post has a piece up right now where they say that, well, most of the scholars think that this prophecy is nonsense and, it's a forgery. Well, like I said, when I first investigated it, I went and read various books about it. And one of the books I read was by a Jesuit named Thurston, and it's one of the more easy to find. And he's the one that really is responsible for probably most of the people that say those things. Now, what he bases his opinion on is the fact that the early part of the prophecy, now we have, this legend that's given in 1139, and then we can't really prove having a copy of it till 1595. So there's a big gap. Now, the thing that's really obvious is that a lot of those matches from 1139 to around 1560, something like that, they're so dead on the coat of arms that it's like, they're just describing it. They're so accurate that it's just amazing. Now, the thing is, they're too accurate, and there's a way that they've proven pretty conclusively that somebody went back and modified that part of the prophecy. Now, the way that we know this is that, there weren't a lot of books available to people at this time. So there was a Vatican librarian, and his name is Panvinius. And most people, there's several scholars think that he's the one that actually uncovered the text of the Malachi prophecy. But what's interesting is he had also written the most authoritative book on the history of the papacy. So he was the author of this book, and he was the scholar to look to. Well, the thing that's interesting is that now, looking back, historians can see that Panvinius made a few mistakes in his papal history. Now, what's interesting is that where Panvinius got the coat of arms mixed up for a couple popes, the Malachi prophecy also has those same mistakes. It's out of order in the exact same way. The other thing that's really interesting is that the Malachi prophecy seems to include a few anti-popes. Now, if you don't know what an anti-pope is, there's actually been many times in history where more than one person has proclaimed himself to be the pope. The Catholic Church has had a lot of controversy. There have been divisions and schisms, they call them, and some outright bloody battles in history. But there were several times between 1139 and 1500 or so where you had anti-popes. And the thing that's interesting is the Malachi prophecy has some of the anti-popes, but not all of them. Now, the thing that's very telling is that Panvinius' book includes the same anti-popes in his list and excludes the same ones. So these things are kind of dead giveaways that whoever, was deciphering the first part of the Malachi prophecy, interpreting it, telling how it was fulfilled, actually changed it so it matched Panvinius' book to the letter. Now, why would they do this? Well, the reason why, like Tom was saying, is that it looks like somebody had a certain candidate in mind that they were trying to get, to win the papacy. So what they did is they made the prophecy look really dead on accurate, and then the very next one on the list was their guy, and they made it describe him. And so it really, someone took, what we think was a real prophecy, and then they changed the early part of it to make it really good so their guy would win the next thing. Well, according to our research, the Simon Selly, who most people think that it was rigged for, didn't win anyway, which makes it kind of frustrating for him, I suppose. But then, after 1595, when this prophecy is published, the character of the way the prophecies are fulfilled changes. It's not always about the coat of arms. Now, there have been some really good matches for coat of arms after we can prove that it was published. And those, do beg a explanation, because there's no way that someone went back and changed this, because we have the Latin text in 1595, and that's undisputed. Now, there's been several instances, some in recent history, that nailed the coat of arms. And like in our new book that we've been working on all day today, Exo-Vaticana, we're talking about, the Vatican's interest in astronomy. Now, I cover the whole controversy with Galileo. One of the things that Galileo did wrong is he really made the Pope angry. He kind of made fun of the Pope in his book about heliocentric theory, the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. And he kind of made the Pope look bad. And that's one of the reasons he got in so much trouble. But what was interesting is the Pope, I discovered, is that Pope Urban VIII was the Pope that Galileo was dealing with. Now, this was in around 1595 or so, just around the same time that this prophecy was about to be published. Well, his coat of arms matched the Malachi prophecy really accurately. Pope Urban was from Florence, and he had a red lily on his coat of arms. The Malachi prophecy for him was lily and a rose. So that's one that is, right at the time where you can't really say it was after the fact. And it matched the coat of arms really well. Now, another one that matches the coat of arms is really, in the 20th century, was Paul VI. Now, his motto was Flos Florum, and that just means flower of flowers. Okay? So his heraldry, his coat of arms, has three what they call a fleur de lis, and that's like the French symbol for the French monarchy. It's this little 3-leafed flower-looking thing. It's really unique to him, but it translates, that French fleur de lis literally means flower of the lily. Now, some people might be thinking, so what? That, it seems to match this coat of arms. Maybe these popes are like, the Simon Selly thing. Maybe they saw, flowers on the list, and then he picked his coat of arms so it would match, so that would get him elected. Well, I thought of that too, and I did some investigation in that. And, they have rules about this in Roman Catholicism. You have to have your coat of arms in place when you become a bishop. Now, you can go look in the Catholic Encyclopedia under the entries of these popes, and you'll find out that most of them become bishop like 20, sometimes 30 years before they ever get elected pope. Now, you think about the odds of trying to anticipate how many popes will be between you and the next time the prophecy is fulfilled. It would be really hard to pull that off. So I don't think that we can explain it away by them picking their coat of arms to match the prophecy. If that were the case, you'd probably also see a lot of cardinals with the same kind of coat of arms, but you don't really see that. So, I think that, these matches to the coat of arms after the publication are pretty good evidence that there's something going on with this prophecy.
Folks, if you're just joining in right now, we are live with Tom Horn of the Raiders News Network and Cris Putnam of Logos Apologia. Prolific authors, and our subject tonight is Exo-Vaticana. Vaticana? Did I pronounce that right? I'm not good at Latin.
Vaticana.
Petrus, Romanus, and the last pope. I'm going to take a quick break and reset our connection. We'll be right back, folks, with our guests. Stand by. Cris, I'm going to dial you back.
Okay.
To talk with OmegaMan, dial area code 917-889-2745 and press option 1 on your phone. To listen live to OmegaMan Radio from your cell phone, dial 917-889-2745. From coast to coast and worldwide on the internet, this is OmegaMan Radio with Shannon Davis.
All right, folks, we're back. I just need to reset Skype connection. Okay, gentlemen, a question for you. We were speaking about Malachi Martin along the way here tonight. Malachi Martin, do you believe he was murdered?
You know what? I have to tell you that the longer I'm alive, the more I think he could have been. Look, right now, as cardinals from around the world are arriving in Rome for the conclave that will elect Petrus Romanus, the final pope, and the successor to Pope Benedict XVI, you got reports burning up Italian news media alleging gay sex scandals in the Vatican, new claims of child sexual abuse, pedophilism by priests, and also, of course, international criticism of the Vatican Bank's money laundering. These are all things that Malachi Martin was pointing to decades ago. I find it reminiscent of everything that he was writing about. It's been on my mind the last few days, and he wasn't the only one. There are Catholic leaders from around the world that have carefully over the years claimed that behind the child abuse and the banking scandal is something much darker, and it's directly related to the arrival of the final pope and the final conclave. First of all, there's been the testimony among these highly placed church experts like Malachi who have asserted that Satan worship is real, it's occurring inside the walls of the Holy See, and it is directly connected to pedophilism. Those claims were made by Monsignor Luigi Marinelli. Remember him? He wrote a book in 1999 called Gone with the Wind in the Vatican. It sold 100,000 copies in just 3 weeks. But it discusses Satanism being practiced by pedophilic cardinals at the Vatican. Then you have the exorcist, the Archbishop Emmanuel Milingo, who in his speech at Our Lady of Fatima 2000, the International Conference on World Peace, he charged publicly that high-ranking members of the church were in league with Satan. And the late exorcist that we're talking about, Malachi Martin, when the Manhattan Magazine asked him about those, the Fatima Crusader, asked him about the public alarm that was raised over Archbishop Milingo's claims that high-ranking Vatican officials were followers of Satan, Martin's answer was, anybody who is acquainted with the state of affairs in the Vatican in the last 35 years is well aware that the Prince of Darkness has had and continues to have his surrogates in the court of St. Peter in Rome. Now, we could also point to some of the most venerated Marian apparitions that have been sanctioned by the Church, including the Fatima apparitions and the La Salette visions that include information concerning how Rome would become the seat of the Antichrist at the end of time. Now, people listening to the show tonight, I'm sure that some of them are Catholics, and they might be surprised to learn that their own Catholic leaders down through time foresaw Rome becoming the seat of the Antichrist. That was actually a very common eschatology among high-level Catholic scholars in the past. We wrote about some of them in Petrus Romanus. We wrote about Cardinal Henry Manning. We wrote about Bishop Salvador Zola. We wrote about Frederick William Hell and others, all of whom said that in the last days, demonically infested clergy at the highest levels in Rome would subvert and would use the papacy as a political vehicle for an occult world order. And Malachi Martin was a very outspoken Jesuit priest concerning those facts. And to answer your question, 10 years before something pulled his feet out from under him while he was preparing for an exorcism, and he fell and then he later died. And by the way, at that time, he was working on what he promised was going to be his most explosive book ever. It had the title Primacy, How the Institutional Roman Catholic Church Became a Creature of the New World Order. He had become increasingly outspoken about the pedophilic Satanism at the heart of the Vatican, throughout the College of Cardinals, all the way down to the local parishes, which he said were in league with a secret diabolicus. In fact, he said it began following the enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer in the Roman Catholic citadel on June 29, 1963. Remember that?
Right.
And that ritual, as he called it, had two primary objectives, and these couldn't be more newsworthy than today, reading today's headlines about the claims of gay sex scandals and pedophilism in Rome, because what he wrote, and this decades ago, was that the enthronement of Lucifer had two objectives. Number one was to enthrone Lucifer as the prince over Rome, but number two was to assure the sorcerous inception and the embodiment in flesh of that immaterial spirit that would fill the final pope, Petrus Romanus, in a final conclave. He wrote about that in The Keys of This Blood. He wrote about that in Windswept House, and we talked about all those things. I could give you the quotes tonight on this radio show about what he said. We wrote about all of that in the book Petrus Romanus, which now, by the way, is like one of the number one books in the world because of the resignation of the Pope.
Okay, so let me propose three scenarios to you. And based on your research, what do you think is the most credible? Here we have the current Pope Ratzinger, who reportedly was part of the Hitler Youth Party. And he is being made as the scapegoat for the Catholic Church. Someone's got to pay for all the scandal that someone's got to be blamed for all the scandal coming to light. Or is it Ratzinger's personal skeletons are coming to light, and the rumors that he is a pedophile, and there's proof of that, is the case, why he's being made to step down? Or number three, do you think that the Antichrist says, hey, I'm ready to get on the scene here. You need to step down so I can move into your place? Because popes just don't quit, do they? They're either poisoned or they die in office of natural causes. What do you think is the truth here?
Well, I think it's both, and I'll let Chris go first, but then I have some stuff I can say too.
I think it's a variation of number three. I don't see any evidence that he himself is a pedophile. There's some good evidence, though, that he was complicit and helped compose a document that absolutely protected the pedophiles, that kind of re-victimized the victims, because it really, the document that I've seen that he authored, it really protected the church and protected the pedophile priests at the expense of the victims. And in fact, it's pretty astounding what the language of that document says. And I can send you a link to it if you want to email me from my website. He was talking about Malachi Martin's, accusations of Satanism within the Vatican. I mean, real traditional Catholics, they believe Malachi Martin. I don't agree with all his theology, but, I think that he was telling the truth, because from what I can tell, there's something that historians talk about. Like, I like to argue about the resurrection with skeptics. And, one of the things that we use is called the principle of embarrassment. And what that means is when someone testifies in a way that's not flattering to themselves, that makes them look bad, that's usually, an authentication of what they're saying. Like, so when the Gospels say that the disciples all ran and hid and Peter denied the Lord 3 times, that's an embarrassing detail that kind of makes their story seem more real. So when Malachi Martin is talking about, the church that he, was loyal to, I mean, he was an advisor to 3 popes. He was a Jesuit priest. And then when he's saying these things that are very unflattering to his organization, they have an air of truthfulness to them, because I can't see any agenda that he would be trying to work out. Now, some of the things that he said that 2 popes had been murdered in the 20th century. He talked about Pope Pius XI that was murdered by Mussolini's people. He talked about Pope John Paul I, who was the Pope for only 33 days in the year 1978. He believes that he was murdered, probably by the Communist Party. Now, 1978 was a terribly interesting year, and we kind of unpack that in our book, Exo-Vaticana. If you want, we'll get into that maybe after the break. But, just a couple other things. In this new document that Tom mentioned, there's a preface in that document where Malachi Martin gives his testimony that the popes John Paul the 23rd and Paul the 6th were actually covert Freemasons. Now, that's what this document says. This is in a French book. It's called The Eclipse of the Church, and it really talks about how they were, just kind of attacked by Masonic influences and how they've been undermined. In his book, The Jesuits, which was the one that he published in 1987, he talks about all kinds of compromises between the Vatican and the Soviet Union. A thing that he called the Metz Accord, where the Vatican allegedly promised not to condemn communism, in public. For a deal where they had an exchange, they had some Russian Orthodox prelates come to the Second Vatican Council and some other kind of under the table skullduggery. So, I mean, the Vatican has this reputation of making these under-the-table political deals. And I think a lot of the controversy with Benedict, you're getting back to what's going on with him, has been this deal with the Vatican Bank. There's been a lot of documents that have come out from this VatiLeaks scandal last year that seem to implicate the Vatican Bank in political payoffs, especially in the Italian politics, and bid rigging, basically, awarding contracts to certain favored family members and people like that. So it's the sort of corruption that you normally see in politics through the bank. But I don't think we've begun to even scrape the surface of what's going on with the Vatican Bank. I think more of that will probably be revealed. So I think Benedict really is tired. I think his health probably is bad. He's old. I think, though, what it comes down to is that there are powers and principalities. There are supernatural forces that are at work. And it's really, they're the ones pressing the buttons. Now, he might have the best of intentions, and maybe he does. But they do have a schedule, and it seems to me that they wanted him out of the way.
Chris and Tom, that brings up a great question. If you were betting man tonight, and you had to put odds on Ratzinger, would you say that he's a dead man walking? Could he be at any time taken out like Ariel Sharon by someone slipping digitalis in his tea. How long do you think this guy is going to survive once he moves into that wing there on the Vatican premises?
Well, look, I know we're getting ready to go to the top of the hour break, and maybe I should hold most of my comments for after we come back from the break. I think dead man walking, maybe not, as long as he does what he's supposed to do. But on the other hand, I think if he thinks he's going to sit back and be the voice behind the voice for Petrus Romanus, his illnesses are going to extrapolate very quickly.
Absolutely. We're going to take a break here. Before we do, I want you to give you contact information. When we come back, I want to talk about the new book, Exo-Vaticana, and we have some other questions like who is the Black Pope? Another question, tell us more, Tom, about Lucifer Telescope, and some more great questions. Tom and Chris, give out your contact information. Tell people how they can reach you, and they can obtain your books. Support your work, please. RaidersNewsUpdate.com. There's a contact button on the page, and you can also follow. It's updated almost every day.
LogosApologia.org, and the email was logosapologia@gmail. So that's Logos, Logos, Apologia, Apologia.
Now, gentlemen, you have a number of books out, including tonight. I want you to bring us up to date on David Flynn's book. I know last time you were on, that was something you were in the works on, but we'll give more contact detail out later. But right now, at this juncture, before the break, is there a phone number a person could call if they would like to order any of these books tonight?
Actually, the best way to do it is just to go to survivormall.com. There is a phone number on the bottom of the page. I don't know it from memory because they're a third party that does all that for me. Survivormall.com. They can also pre-order these books or order these books from Amazon. One thing I should make clear is that we will be giving away an extensive library with the new book, Exo-Vaticana, but only if it is ordered directly from survivormall.com. Probably you're going to see the ads going up for that, I would say, in about 10 days from now.
We want you to give us a taste of what we can expect in this book when we come back from this break. Folks, don't go too far away. We'll be right back with Tom Horn and Cris Putnam. All right, everybody, welcome back to a live program right now, episode 918. Our special guest is Tom Horn and Cris Putnam. They are prolific authors, and they've got a new book coming out called Exo-Vaticana. You may know them from their recent book, Petrus, Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. Their websites, RaidersNewsUpdate.com and LogosApologia.com. .org, yes. LogosApologia.org. There's Chris, and let's get Tom back on the line. And, folks, if you'd like to speak to these gentlemen, we do have wide open lines all night. Tom and Chris, here's the question of the night. In your research, have you come across a mysterious figure known as the Black Pope? And I'm not talking about his skin color.
Well, that's a common reference, actually, to the Superior General of the Jesuits, and it's kind of a derogatory statement. But dating back through time and history, it has something more to do with the idea that he's actually the real voice behind the voice, that he's actually the guy that's pulling the strings of the Pope. The Pope is a figurehead in much the same way that you look at a United States president. And Obama, let me not use derogatory language concerning him, but for what he is, he also has an awful lot of people behind him that also pull his strings, write his speeches and whatever, and the historical belief was that the real person, the real power behind the throne in Rome is the leader of the Jesuits. One of the things that we did in research for Petrus Romanus was we took a pretty strong look at the Jesuits and what was happening with the Jesuits. And the reason we did that is because some of the Jesuits were the ones who were offering the most critical analysis of the prophecy of the popes. And yet among the Jesuits, like René Thibault, we also found some of the greatest support. And let me say, René Thibault, as a Jesuit who thoroughly approved the prophecy of the popes and thought it was a true mystical document, he's turned out to be a lot he's turned out to be more accurate than any of those other Jesuits ever dreamed of being, so you have to give him kudos for that. But the other part of the Jesuits we were looking into had to do more with the Malachi Martin kind, who were looking towards a final conclave and seeing that this would be a time when a pope's going to come. He's going to be the false prophet. He's going to be under the control of Satan. And some believe that Malachi Martin was killed, as you brought up before the break, and his death was covered up, and it was done so because he was revealing this satanic scheme to use the Catholic Church as a launching pad for a Luciferic Novus Ordo Seclorum, a New World Order. Now, whether he was actually murdered or whether his death was just one of those things, we'll probably never know. But 1 year before he died, his very good friend, Father Alfred Kunz, was brutally murdered at his St. Michael Catholic Church in Dane, Wisconsin, and Kunz had been investigating the same Satanism, the same pedophilism among the priests that Martin had warned about, which is in the news now today around the world following the resignation of Pope Benedict. And Kunz had told Martin in the weeks just before his murder that he was afraid for his life. He was afraid. And then when he was found dead and his throat was slit, Martin went on different radio shows and said that he had inside information through the Jesuits that the Vatican Luciferians had murdered Kunz because he was getting ready to blow the lid off their conspiracy. I hired a private investigator when we were working on Petrus Romanus last year and found several things. One, that there was a satanic animal sacrifice. Now, remember, Malachi Martin in Windswept House had described a satanic animal sacrifice as part of the enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer in the Vatican. And that seemed eerily comparable to what was actually discovered in Dane County during the first hours of the murder investigation of Father Kunz, including a calf that had been found sacrificed on a farm near St. Michael's Church exactly 24 hours before Kunz was last seen alive. And according to the police reports, which we were soliciting, the calf's throat was slit, just like Father Kunz, and its genitals had been cut off. And there are details that we don't discuss in the book due to their horrific nature, but deep within occultism, there are reasons for removing the genitals of a sacrifice that have to do with blasphemy of the Old Testament description of animals being accounted unworthy as offerings to the Lord if their testicles are bruised or cut or torn, and so on. But during the investigation, we also made formal requests of the Dane County Sheriff's Office for pertinent case files pertaining to the ongoing investigation of the Father Kunz homicide. And what's interesting is at first we were told that the specific files that we had requested would be given to us. And then on December 15th, 2011, this is when we're doing the research for the book that would come out a few months later, Petrus Romanus, we got a letter from the office of Lieutenant Mark Twombly that had been signed by Sheriff Mahoney that the district attorney would need to approve the release of the files, or in other words, it was going to take a court order, and therefore the request was denied. So we made a second request for less sensitive records, and we were able to obtain a packet of files, but none of those provided the clue to the larger question of conspiracy related to the murder of Father Kunz that we were looking for. Specifically, was evidence discovered at the crime scene that his murder was somehow connected to his conservative position on Vatican II, and more importantly, that he had information on certain pedophile priests and Satanists that had earned him fierce enemies within the church, that reached all the way to the Catholic hierarchy in Rome, that had been involved in ceremonies and behavior related to the enthronement of Lucifer, rituals conducted for the purpose of transmigrating a particular spirit into the man who would eventually become Petrus Romanus, who is alive now and will be voted in about 3 weeks, and what that had to do with the ritual abuse of children, all of which Malachi Martin said was happening. Father Coons said it was happening. Malachi dies a mysterious death. Father Coons just right when he's getting ready to expose something about this, calls Malachi Martin, says, "I'm afraid for my life." Then he's found with his throat slit. So what I'm saying is, there's substantial evidence that indeed something is going on. And Pope John Paul I, that Cris mentioned earlier, that only served in office for 33 days, don't forget, his death has been the subject of controversy ever since he died, and it was tied to evidence that he may have been murdered to keep him, too, from revealing information that could have included information about pedophiles and Satanism, as well as Masonic cardinals, and an investigation that he, too, had launched into the Vatican Bank. And that, of course, would have involved Roberto Calvi. Remember him? The chairman of the Ambrosiano Bank at the Vatican. That the Vatican was the primary shareholder of, and that 1978 monies discovered being illegally laundered. Doesn't that sound like today's headline? What they're talking about the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And Calvi fled Italy. 3 days later, the bank shares crashed. 1 day after that, his secretary conveniently committed suicide, right? Calvi himself was found hanging beneath a bridge in London. His death was reported to have been at the hand of the Freemasons. And this new French book that Cris Putnam discovered. Cris is great, by the way, at doing this. He's a crazy investigator. I mean, he's a fantastic investigator. And now he turns up this new book that most of the world don't know anything about, called The Eclipse of the Church, in which Malachi Martin testified that Pope John the 23rd and Paul the 6th were secret Freemasons, and that detailed documents and photographs proving that were in the possession of, guess who? The Vatican State Secretariat, Angelo Sodano, who many believe to be one of the manipulators behind the VatiLeaks scandal, but his name is also now in there among the possible candidates for Petrus Romanus. So the deeper you dig into this phenomenon, the more you realize that there's something very, very curious going on in Rome.
Go for it, Cris.
I like Sodano as a particular candidate because he's an Italian. I'm not too impressed by the name Peter. I think that's too obvious. I think Sodano is a good candidate for Petrus Romanus. I mean, I take the Roman part much more seriously than I take the Peter part, because I think they all claim to be Peter. And going to the black pope thing, my opinion on that is that there's quite a bit of conspiracy lore on the internet that the black pope, the head of the Jesuit order, is actually the guy running this show, and I don't buy that.
The shadow pope, if you will.
No, I don't believe that. I think that might have been true at a couple points in history, but I mean, when you look at the theology of Roman Catholicism, I mean, if you're going to take it at face value at all, the Pope is the vicar of Christ. I mean, this is the Protestant reformers' claim against the church. Well, that Latin term, vicar, means the same thing as the prefix anti in Greek. I mean, literally, vicar of Christ means instead of Christ. He is Christ's sole representative on the earth. He's the head of the church on the earth. I mean, that's the way their theology parses all this. I mean, so the Protestant reformers would say, well, the word antichrist in Greek, it means instead of Christ. He's literally claiming to be the Antichrist. He's just using Latin.
Does the Catholic Church claim to have the power to be able to change rules, times, and seasons? I mean, I've heard some research that points to, even back in Constantine's time, they changed the date of the true Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And Catholic Church says, hey, we have that right to do what we want to do. Is there any proof to this claim?
Well, I don't know about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a Jewish, holiday institution, and there's evidence actually for the early church meeting on Sunday, because that was the day of the resurrection. So that didn't really have anything to do with Constantine, because you can look at documents in the 2nd century that talk about the church meeting on the first day of the week. I mean, I think that's even in the New Testament. So I don't know about that with the Sabbath thing, but I do know you're right about especially Easter. Now, that's what happened at the First Council of Nicaea and with Constantine. And they did intentionally change the date of Easter so it would never match the Passover, which is actually, when it happens. So, and they did that intentionally to distance themselves from the Jews. It was an anti-Semitic move. And you can read their own writings, and I have, from the Council of Nicaea. They intentionally calculated it and created the calculation where it would never actually fall on the Jewish holiday of Passover, which, according to the New Testament, is when it actually occurred. So,
okay, back to this current Pope. Here's a question coming. There's some talk that the next Pope may be of African ethnicity or even Hispanic. What are you thinking on that, Tom and Chris?
Yeah, well, it's very possible. In fact, what's very interesting is that we, in our book, Petrus Romanus, we provided a top 10 list. And even then, all we were saying was if we had to pick who we think the next pope will be, the guy that's going to take the role of Petrus Romanus, this would be our top 10 pick. And then besides the top 10, we mentioned some others that would also be players. And what's interesting is Paddy, whatever it's called, the online betting place, basically took our top 10 from the book Petrus Romanus, and they've kept that over there as their top 10 pick with very few exceptions, except when Chris and I are on radio and we happen to mention some other name, and then they change it over there too. Well, they did, actually. When I mentioned Cardinal Peter Erdo, this was a name that wasn't on anybody's radar, but his name is Peter, and I said he was another possibility if you want to really stick to the name Peter. He's a Hungarian cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church. He's the Archbishop in Budapest. He's a primate of Hungary. He's also young. He's 61 years old. He's the president of the Council of Bishops, and his name is Peter. But I'm like Chris, and we've said this from the very beginning. I think it's a mistake to get hung up on the name Peter. Now, if somebody is elected who has the name Peter, then that will be an astonishing fulfillment of the prophecy. One of the guys in our top 10 list, of course, Cardinal Tarcisio, and we even call him Peter the Roman Bertoni. He is papable. And but he's also 77 or 78 years of age, and we just had one pope who only served a short period of time. And I think among the College of Cardinals, they might be looking for somebody a little bit younger so they can have a longer pope. Now, there's also other things related to that, and that is that we've been hearing lately among some of the cardinals are saying that maybe the time has come for to put term limits on the pope, like the U.S. president has, where they can't serve more than 2 terms. If they did that, then age is less of an issue. And one other thing I will say, and this is something people should take note of, Peter the Roman, if only for a very short period of time, is going to be the Pope March 1, because Cardinal Tarcisio Bertoni, Peter the Roman Bertoni, is the Pope's Carmelingo. And the Pope resigned as of February 28th. March 1, Tarcisio Peter the Roman Bertoni will step into the place of filling in for the Pope until the College of Cardinals elect a new Pope. So even if it's only for 2 to 3 weeks, you are literally going to have the man standing on the throne of Peter, sitting on the throne of Peter, is literally going to be Peter the Roman. But I think that Angelo Scola is a good choice right now. Some have him connected to the political machinations that we, in our book, were talking about before the world was talking about it, and that everybody today calls Vatileaks. There's another Peter Turkson. He's an Igbo African from Ghana. He's young, too, age 63. And that would take it outside of the Italians, and that might be a fulfillment of the prophecy. There's another possibility, though I think it's unlikely. That's Cardinal Bakara Boutros al-Rahi. He's age 72, but Boutros means Peter in Arabic. In fact, when you pronounce the baby name Boutros in Arabic, it sounds like Petrus. He was born in Lebanon, where the Watchers descended on Mount Hermon. So there you go for starting a major conspiracy. He's also, though, on record supporting the Hezbollah's right to use arms against Israel, and he kind of celebrates the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, so he's probably a little too out there for many of them. I also think Cardinal Mark Cooley of Canada is a possibility. Oh, and by the way, Cardinal Dolan from here in the United States and another cardinal here in the U.S. are suddenly being talked about as not just papable, but there's a buzz about them as maybe being the successor to Benedict, and if that happens, I think that this could be an astonishing fulfillment of the rise of the Antichrist. Now, I think we're seeing the implementation of the system of Antichrist right now anyway, but the Italian paper La Repubblica this week was reporting that Dolan is actually being pushed by Peter the Roman Bertone, who's working behind the scenes to advance him as a potential candidate. And this could be really an astonishing development over the arrival of the false prophet and the Antichrist system, because for the first time in history, you would have the world's most powerful religious figure and the world's most powerful political figure representing the world's most powerful country all at one time. We'll wait and see who gets voted in. But if a cardinal from the United States gets elected, then I think you're going to see the prophecy zone in the blogosphere is probably going to go insane.
Gentlemen, I want to talk about your new book that is about to go on the press, Exo-Vaticana. What does that mean? And give us a taste of what's coming in this newest release.
I'll take that. So Exo-Vaticana, where this prefix exo, if you think about it, if you follow any of the science writing lately, they talk about exoplanets. What does it mean in that context? It means a planet outside of our solar system. There's something that we call exotheology. Now, what does that mean? That means how would theology handle an extraterrestrial reality? So, if you see the cover of our book, we have a picture of St. Peter's Basilica with a UFO flying over the top of it, and it looks pretty incredible. And so that really begs an explanation, doesn't it? What are we trying to say here? Well, I hinted before the break at the year 1978, this year when Pope John Paul I, died after 33 days. Malachi Martin says that he was killed at the hands of the communist element that's within the Vatican. One of the things about the Black Pope that I didn't get a chance to mention was that a lot of this is about liberation theology. There's actually kind of a reinterpretation of Christianity along the lines of Marxism that's, basically communist. It's basically a political movement, but that's a big controversy within the Catholic Church. But when we look at this year, 1978, what I found is kind of unprecedented, and it really justifies the cover of our new book, Exo-Vaticana, in a surprising way. So this is the year they actually had 3 popes. Now think about how rare that is in history. We're talking about in succession, not anti-popes trying to compete with each other, but actually in succession. You had Pope Paul VI. Now he was the one that Malachi Martin is claiming was a closet Freemason. He's also the one that has been quoted saying the smoke of Satan has entered the sanctuary. It was, when he was inaugurated, that the claim of this parallel enthronement ceremony for the Archangel Lucifer occurred in Charleston, South Carolina, and Rome. So when he dies, we have John Paul I come in office, and then he's from the midst of the moon. He comes to the office right on the day of a half moon, lives 1 lunar cycle, he dies. But right in the middle of that 33-day papacy, there was an unprecedented UFO flap over Rome. And in ufology, flap is just a word that means there was just a large amount of sightings. There were a lot of people seeing UFOs and making UFO reports. And, these aren't vague, like little lights in the sky that we're talking about. I'm talking about people were seeing and describing flying saucers. They were just seeing technology like a green beam of light being shot down. And these aren't just like wackos. It's not just a few people. We're talking about this made the New York Times in 1978, and it was seen all over Europe later in the year, but it started in Rome right when John Paul I was in the middle of that brief papacy. Now, I have a report from the Mutual Unidentified Flying Object Network, and I'll just read a little snippet from it. It says, at 5:50 a.m. on September 14th, people in Rome saw a triangle object for 5 minutes. About the same time, people near Florence saw a cigar-shaped object. Early on the morning of the 16th, the highway police near Rome received calls about a luminous triangle and a beam of greenish light. So right at this time, I mean, we had Vatican guards, policemen, military officials, government officials, all went on record and reported this occurrence. So what do you make of that? Well, in the book Exo-Vaticana, we talk about UFOs and we talk about aliens and all these things. You know, we don't really think that these UFOs had anything to do with aliens from other planets. I think there's a very good case to be made that this phenomenon has been occurring on the Earth since the dawn of time, basically. It seems to stay 2 steps ahead or 1 step ahead of the technology of the day. You know, back in the 40s, they were telling us they were from Venus or Mars. You know, as we started to learn better than that, now, you know, you listen to the people that have contact with these entities, and they'll say that they're from, you know, a different star system, something that we can't verify. But the story always stays 1 step ahead of the technology. So we think that there is a one-to-one correspondence with the powers and principalities that Paul talks about in Ephesians 6:12. I did quite a bit of biblical exegesis on the New Testament, and this is all detailed in the book, but the New Testament worldview was that the demonic realm was mainly in the atmosphere between the earth and the moon. These words that, you know, when Paul says the rulers, the authorities, you know, these Greek terms like cosmic crater, archon, they actually are talking about entities that live in the atmosphere above the earth, you know, and that's, you know, in Ephesians chapter 2, Satan is called the prince of the power of the air, okay? That was the literal view of the New Testament, that these entities were in the air. So is it really so surprising, given that we have all this biblical theology, that we see, you know, these unidentified aerial phenomenon, you know, over the skies when there's unprecedented spiritual warfare going on? You know, in Rome, you have a pope basically probably, you know, being conspired against and killed in 1978, and right at the same time, UFOs just lit up the skies over the whole city. And I'm supplying the documentation for that. I have clippings from the New York Times, from various UFO organizations, but, you know, the testimony is really solid, and the types of witnesses that we're talking about aren't, you know, people that you can say are crazy.
You know, Chris, I'll add to that.
I want to add something to that, Shannon, because, again,
Yes.
This goes back to your radio show. Last year we did the Prophecy of the Pope's radio show with you. That went into the blogosphere top show in the world for a week. But when we came back, and what had happened was on the very first show, there was just some comment. I don't even remember what it was. People can go back and listen to the archive show, I suppose. But there was some comment about a connection between the coming of this new Pope and astrobiology. And the idea that an alien savior might arrive at some point in the future. So again, I don't remember exactly what the comment was, but following that, I remember Steve contacting me, and he wanted me to come back on, and we were going to do a second show because you guys were getting so much feedback about that one comment that people wanted to know more about it. So we did the second show, in which we were talking about the Vatican ET connection, and that show became the #1 show in the world for something like a month to 6 weeks. It was just literally unprecedented, and what it illustrated was that the world has more than a casual interest in this connection between what Vatican spokespersons are saying and what they might know that the rest of the world doesn't know, and what that might have to do with the imminent future. So I contacted Cris, we talked about it, and we decided that we were going to start another true investigation in which we were going to try to get to the bottom of where these Vatican astronomers were coming from. And we didn't just do this by reading comments that they had made in the media. We wound up going where they are, and we even got more than 5 interviews with Guy Cosmonolgo from Rome, the leading Vatican astronomer. And by the way, when the book Exo-Vaticana comes out and people read it, no reasonable person is going to be able to survey that final report that's coming out maybe in about 3 to 4 weeks from now. We're pushing really hard trying to have this out by the middle of March. Nobody's going to read that and doubt that someone or something is operating outside the average man's purview in league with at least some of the world's elite, including Catholic elite. Smack dab in the middle of this conspiracy isn't just NASA. It isn't just aeronautic and space administrations like the European Space Agency, but the Vatican. And in a lot of ways, when you read our investigation, it makes perfect sense. Official disclosure of extraterrestrial intelligence and habitable alien worlds, which, by the way, is likely to be announced in 2013, this year, according to scientists like Abel Mendez, that runs the Planetary Habitability Laboratory at the University of Puerto Rico, is going to have a profound effect on humanity. Well, whether it happens this year, 2014, or whenever, it definitely is going to have a profound effect on humanity, both psychologically and spiritually. And due to the nature of man, most of the world's people are going to be looking for traditional religious leaders to put the revelation of exo-worlds and aliens into context. Well, you know, is the most powerful church on earth, 1 billion-plus people. It has its own diplomatic corps of ambassadors posted throughout the industrialized nations of the world. The Vatican, unlike any other Christian organization, is uniquely positioned. But besides being uniquely positioned, and this is the part that's going to get people, it's also been actively preparing for the official disclosure moments, and some of its own leaders, those who have been recognized by the church as their mouthpiece on astrobiology, are saying that the Vatican's what do they call them, nunciators? Anyway, their official ambassadorial buildings and stuff around the world have been collecting information, top secret information on the alien presence on Earth now. I'm not making this up. This is according to people like Geraldo Balducci and other people who are spokesmen for the church. So to try to get to the bottom of this was the deal. Cris and I wanted to go right to the horse's mouth. So we started our investigation into what Vatican astronomers were saying and where they were coming from by going to Mount Graham in Arizona.
You mean Lucifer's telescope?
Yeah. We went. We set it up through the Arizona University, southeastern Arizona, to go to the Mount Graham International Observatory. On that mountain, there's 3 telescopes. There's the Large Binocular Telescope, which is an optical telescope. It's one of the largest in the world. Near it is in fact, between it and the Vatican's telescope is what's called the submillimeter telescope, a radio telescope. And then there's the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, or VAT. Now, the Lucifer device, which Cris could also add a lot of information to, this is inside the Large Binocular Telescope building. It's mounted between the focal points of the LBT's 2 giant 28 or so foot diameter mirrors. The Lucifer instrument is a device that observes in the near infrared wavelength range. And, of course, the importance of infrared is that it can detect objects that are too far away or that are too faint to be observed in visible light. It also has longer wavelengths than visible light, which means it can pass through astronomical gas and dust without getting scattered, so that objects that would otherwise be obscured from view in the visible spectrum can be observed by Lucifer's infrared technology. As a matter of fact, people listening to the show probably already know that UFO researchers have fascinated for a long time how infrared can be used to spot and track unidentified flying objects that can't be seen with other telescopes or the naked eye. You can go to YouTube and type in infrared UFO, and some of the most astonishing UFOs that have ever been caught on film have been recorded with infrared. And in fact, NASA some years ago shut down one of its infrared telescopes that was broadcasting on a feed on the internet, because that's where some of the most astonishing UFOs ever seen, mile-wide, pulsating UFOs. Like if you've watched the trailer, if you go to YouTube and type in Exo-Vaticana, there's a whole bunch of YouTubes that are popping up all of a sudden about it. But if you find the one that we put up there that's been downloaded this last couple of weeks, I don't know, over 100,000 times, you'll see that we took one of those UFOs, pulsating miles wide, pulsating UFOs, is in the trailer for our book. But there's a curious connection between the Lucifer device, and that day, by the way, while we were up there, we went to the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope. They gave us access to everything there. We saw where the Jesuits sleep, where they eat. We saw their study rooms. We saw the rooms that had all the screens and stuff that were monitoring deep space. But we also saw the telescope itself, and they let Cris and I go up and climb around on it and get up on the platform and get pictures. And so they didn't seem to be trying to hide anything from us. But it was interesting that once we left there and we went over to the large binocular telescope, we were there all day long. And one of the systems engineer at the LBT, he's the one that showed us the Lucifer device, explained how it works, spent a lot of time with us that day. And Cris will tell you, one of the things that astonished us, both at the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope and at the LBT, was how passive, how blasé, how common it was for these guys to talk about UFOs in the heavens, and how often it's like it's a common thing. It's like every day they almost get frustrated with the number of UFOs that are zooming in and looking at their telescope and flying away. That was one of the things that we really didn't expect, that it's such a common thing.
Gentlemen, will you be covering in this book questions such as, what the heck is the Vatican doing naming a telescope Lucifer of all names, and what are they looking at out there? Let me ask you, when you went into this place, did the hair stand up on your arms at any time?
A little bit. The whole thing about the Lucifer instrument is an interesting story. The Jesuits will disclaim any culpability whatsoever in naming that instrument. Now, what you have to understand about the Mount Graham Observatory Complex is this is a conglomeration. It's kind of a consortium that was put together by the Vatican and the University of Arizona. And it was really the brainchild of the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group named George Coignet. Now, Coignet was the head of the VORG. He's a Jesuit. The VORG is the Vatican Observatory Research Group. Now, he was a professor at the University of Arizona. The University of Arizona is a mecca for astrobiology and astronomy. It has one of the top programs in the country. So what happened at the University of Arizona is one of the scientists there came up with a revolutionary process for making telescope mirrors. Now, when it comes to telescopes, power is really a function of mirror size, because the bigger the mirror, the more light you can gather. The more light you can gather, the deeper into space that you can see. And actually, the further back in time you can see. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but like our sun is, around between 7 and 8 minutes. It takes light 7 to 8 minutes to get from our sun to the Earth. So quite literally, if the sun were to explode, we wouldn't know it until 8 minutes later. All right? And now the sun is a very close star to the Earth. So if you start thinking about stars that are, 6 light years away, well, that means if that star were to disappear, we wouldn't know it for 6 years, okay? But many stars are thousands of light years away. So when we're looking out into deep space, we're actually looking back into time, which is a very interesting thing. So the bigger the mirror, the further out into space you can see, and the further back in time you can see, which is a very interesting thing. But what happened in Arizona is he came up with a technology that makes a honeycomb mirror circle, where you can make it a lot lighter and a lot larger. So the first mirror they ever made in this laboratory was the mirror that ended up at the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. It was the prototype, and they gave that as a gift to the Vatican. Now, the way this whole observatory complex up on Mount Graham came to be is very controversial. They actually bypassed a lot of the environmental laws, and they had Congress actually legislate this thing into existence. And it's very controversial, and I cover quite a bit of that in the book. The thing that's really the most sensational detail that came out of that investigation, I mean, there's a whole big battle between the Apache Indians and the observatory group. The Lucifer instrument is the product of the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Okay, they're the ones who take credit for naming it Lucifer. Now, what's interesting about them is that this is the same group that basically assisted Dr. Mengele during World War II. I'm not saying it's the same people, but the history of this group, the Max Planck Institute, actually goes back to that. That's their roots. Now, I don't know if any Nazis are involved, and I'm not making that accusation, but that is their history. And what's really interesting is that a reporter for WorldNet Daily interviewed Tom and myself. Her name's Chelsea. I don't remember her last name, but Chelsea, she called the Max Planck Institute. Now, her article is at WorldNet Daily, if you want to read it. It says something about Lucifer. I think you'll find it at WorldNet Daily under Lucifer. But she called them, and quite interestingly, they tried to deny in one breath that they were naming it after the devil. And the word Lucifer comes from Isaiah 14, where it talks about, that I will set myself above the stars of God. Most commentators over history have seen that it's, in one sense, it's talking about the Babylonian king, and the other side, it's talking about the fall of Satan. Well, the King James Version of the Bible uses the name Lucifer in that verse, Isaiah 14, 9, 10, somewhere right in there. And so on one hand, he says, well, that's not really about the devil. That was just about a Babylonian king. So, it's not really fair to say that we named it after Lucifer. But then in the next breath, he says, well, actually, there was a German politician, and his last name in German actually means devil. It means, and so we wanted to honor him because he helped us get the funding to build this thing. So in one breath, he's saying it's not about the devil, and then in the next sentence, he says, well, we wanted to honor this guy who's named after the devil. So he just contradicted himself. So, I mean, apparently, whether they believe that Isaiah 14 is about the devil or not, they did intend to name it after the devil. So that's kind of the backstory behind the Lucifer instrument. I mean, I kind of wonder if they didn't do it just to kind of take a jab at the Jesuits. They think, oh, we got these priests up here, let's name our instrument after the devil. So officially the Jesuits did not name it Lucifer, but their building is right next to it, and they're associated with it, so it creates all this controversy. I think it's kind of one of those things that's like a cosmic Freudian slip. It does have some significance, because if you think about what they're doing up there, the hubris involved, this is mankind basically taking the power in his hand, saying that I'm going to assert myself over God. They're looking, for evidence of the naturalistic worldview to prove what they call the Copernican principle, the principle of mediocrity, that Earth is nothing special and that humans are nothing special, and that evolution happens everywhere in the universe, and if all we have to do is find a planet with life on it, and they can get rid of the Bible and the faith forever. And that's really a lot of what fuels this is philosophical naturalism and really a quest to confirm that worldview.
Chris and Tom,
I would also like to add something to that if we have time, Shannon.
Oh, we got plenty of time. I always have time in my back pocket. Go for it.
Well, just very quickly, I would add that the Jesuits at VAT, they do deny any part in the naming of the infernal Lucifer instrument at the large binocular telescope that's next door to them. But what they don't like to talk about is how they have access to using it. Plus, they're an integral part of the whole complex at Mount Graham that Chris was just describing, and as such, they're connected to the very consortium, the German astronomers that did name Lucifer, that are part of this odious Max Planck Institute that Chris was describing, that were involved with the Nazis in 1940. Another thing, in our interview with Vatican astronomer Guy Cosmonalgo, we were trying to get to the bottom, and people are going to literally be astonished by what some of the material that some of these astronomers gave us, and the theological papers that they have written, and we're talking Opus Dei level material, and what they're expecting, what they're anticipating, what they're preparing for is going to blow people away. Guy Cosmonalgo, we went directly to him, and he indicated that the Vatican's, the Vorg, that they have a new Jesuit point man. Chris could maybe talk about this in a minute too, that's in the search for this alien planet, and that this person has access to the Lucifer device. And he told us that Father Paul Gabor just finished his PhD thesis work at the Paris Observatory on designing an instrument for the European Space Agency, but his degrees are not in optics but in biology. And so he just moved to Tucson, and he's developing the collaborations with those at the University of Arizona that would allow them to have access to the Lucifer device. So based on Cosmonalgo's statement, we already know that the Vorg have a well-placed insider in the Large Binocular Telescope through their association with the University of Arizona that's using the Lucifer device. Now, one other thing, there is a curious description on the Vatican Observatory website. This is their own website, and it concerns the Lucifer device. It's sitting there under the heading NASA and the Vatican's infrared telescope called Lucifer, a German-built, I'm still quoting the heading over there at the Vatican Observatory, a German-built NASA and the Vatican-owned and funded infrared telescope for looking at Nibiru Nemesis, end quote. And I raised the question why the Vatican Observatory website has allowed that caption to remain. I find it curious because Nibiru and Nemesis are hypothetical planets that supposedly return in orbit close to the Earth after very long periods of time, but they've been connected in modern myth not just with Planet X, but very darkly with the destruction of planets that some believe occurred during a great war between God and Lucifer when the powerful angel was cast out of heaven. And in the book of Job, if you read the book of Job where the prophet details how God destroyed the literal dwelling places of the angels that made insurrection against him, Job 26:11 through 13 specifically mentions the destruction of Rahab, a planetary body that was also known as Pride, from which God drove, quote, the fugitive snake, end quote. So the question is, and this is part of our investigation, are Rome and other world powers, are they using the Lucifer device to observe something that the rest of us are unaware of? And this was something that Malachi Martin strongly hinted at, if you recall, when Art Bell in the 90s asked Malachi Martin why the Vatican was so heavily invested in the study of deep space at Mount Graham, where Chris and I went. And recall what Malachi Martin said. He said that at the highest levels of the Vatican, there were those who were concerned with what is approaching the earth and that it could be of the utmost importance in coming years. And in subsequent interviews, Malachi talked about this thing that's in the heavens, that it is approaching the earth and that they are watching it from Mount Graham. ironically, when Cris Putnam and I asked Guy Cosmonalgo from Rome what he made of Malachi Martin, he actually seemed to almost be miffed by him, and said that, in all the years that he had been working with the observatory there on top of Mount Graham, that Malachi had never come by and talked to them or whatever. So it seems like there was some real friction there between Malachi Martin and the astronomers actually doing work at the observatory. But Malachi made no bones about it, that the reason they were there is that they're watching something that is approaching the Earth, and that opened some very important questions to me. And as I'm looking at the clock, and I realize we're going to run out of time here in about 4 minutes, and I got another show I got to go do anyway, all I can tell people is it isn't hype. You need to get the book Exo-Vaticana, because you truly are going to be blown away by what the astronomers themselves have told Cris and I. And the work that Cris does is extraordinary in terms of putting it into a theological a property that can be understood by the average individual.
Gentlemen, I'm excited about this new book coming out. How soon is it going to be available, and how does a person go about ordering a copy of this?
Well, I'm hoping that we're going to have it in print by the middle of March. It might be the third week of March. We're pushing really hard. Partly we're pushing really hard because with the Pope's resignation, we now have significant major media around the world that are wanting this book. And Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, they all want to put it on their main entry table. So there's all kinds of pressure like that that's coming in to get the book out now instead of when we had originally intended to have it out in April. And what's interesting, the book's going to come out probably the same time that the conclave in Rome is going to be letting the world know who Petrus Romanus is.
Amazing. While we're still online here tonight, can you also give us an update on the David Flynn project? Last time you were on, you were putting together a new book on David Flynn. Has that been released?
Yeah. In fact, you can go to any bookstore. You can go to Amazon. You can go to SurvivorMall.com. Just type in the David Flynn collection. It's a giant book. It's got the complete book, Temple at the Center of Time. It's got the complete book, Sidonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars. It's got articles that were written. It's got pictures of him. We tried to do it in such a way that it truly raised some appreciation for this dear genius and personal friend of mine that went to be with the Lord, had cancer, died very quickly, and we miss him a lot. But the book is there, and so just type in the David Flynn Collection. There's also a website. I think it's called davidflynncollection.com, but if you go to Google and just type in those words, you'll find it.
Okay, so if someone would like to pre-order a copy of Exo-Vaticana, can they do that? How would they go about it?
They cannot pre-order it yet from Survivor Mall, and Survivor Mall is the only one that will be giving away a vast library. In fact, here's what I would tell you to do. Go to RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and at the top of it, it'll say something like check out what's being given away free with Exo-Vaticana. I don't remember what the line is, but if you click on that, you'll go to Exo-Vaticana.com, and you'll see this enormous library. People, in fact, I got an email today from Bob Ulrich of Prophecy in the News. He said, you guys are insane giving away a library like this for free. Giant, literally tens of thousands of pages of information, but we're going to give all that away free. But that's only if you get it at Survivor Mall, and you cannot yet pre-order it at Survivor Mall. You'll have to just keep your eyes on RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and within maybe 10 days from now, you'll start seeing advertisements about it. However, if you don't care anything about the free library and you just want to order the book, you can do that right now at Amazon. You can do it at Barnes & Noble online, any place like that.
Okay, Tom, for people to contact you directly or follow the work you're doing, get on a newsletter, any other detailed information you want to give out?
Yeah, just RaidersNewsUpdate.com. If you just follow that website, you'll know everything that we're doing.
Chris, I'm going to get your information in 1 second. I want to ask you gentlemen both a bonus question. As the Vatican is looking to the stars, are they also looking to Israel and have their sights set on the Temple Mount? What is your take on that?
I'm going to leave that to Chris, and I got to go because Chris actually predicted in our book, Petrus Romanus, something that's directly related to that.
Tom, thank you for coming on tonight. We'll have you on again soon, my friend.
All right. God bless you guys.
Chris, I'm going to throw that question to you. Does the Vatican have its sights set on control of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount?
Well, according to the latest reports, it doesn't just have its sites, it actually has sovereignty over a site on Mount Zion right now.
Tell me it's not true.
It's true. It was the thing, I did write about it in our book last year. So what I was talking about is there is a building called the Cenacle, and in that building on the second floor, they have what they call the Hall of the Last Supper. Now, this is kind of a legendary place where they claim the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples occurred. Now, I don't know if that's true from an archaeological point of view. And then in the basement of that building, though, they also claim is the tomb of King David. Now, the Vatican has been negotiating with Israel since 1993, which, interestingly, that's the first time the Vatican recognized the nation of Israel. You know, they declared themselves a nation in 1948, and the Vatican disputed it. They've actually been an enemy of that whole process all along. But in 1993, they finally acknowledged them, and it started this whole process of the Oslo Accords. I really think the Vatican plays both sides very skillfully. They're trying to serve their own interests, but you'll see them support the Palestinians, and then they'll support Israel. They play both sides against each other, and what they're trying to do is get sovereignty over the old city of Jerusalem. They've always wanted it. You can look at, through church history, the Crusades. The whole purpose of the Crusades was the Vatican, the Pope, trying to get Jerusalem. I mean, they have a whole theology about pilgrimage. And Roman Catholicism is a very works-oriented system where you can earn favor with God. You can, get time shaved off of purgatory by doing certain things. And one of those things is to take a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So literally, you can have certain sins on your record, and according to Catholic theology, you might have to spend a number of years in purgatory to work those sins off. But if you happen to take a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, or maybe pray over the dead body of a pope, then you can actually get some of that time shaved off. These are some of the major issues that I have with Catholic theology, because the way I understand the gospel in the New Testament is that the cross of Jesus Christ, when Jesus atoned for my sins on the cross, that covered every sin that I'll ever commit, past, present, and future. There's nothing that I can do to justify myself to God. It's all on him. And, this idea that I can do rituals or, say Hail Marys or take a trip to Jerusalem, and that somehow earns me atonement for my sins, to me, that's just heresy.
There's no question about it. I think that the Catholic Church is Geno de caca. Translated means full of crap. I've actually been to the site of what they call the Last Supper in Israel, and I even went over and looked at what they think is King David's tomb. But just as I believe the Catholic Church got the site of the crucifixion wrong, and it's actually Gordon's Calvary, I've actually looked at it. It is the place of the skull. I don't believe they found King David's tomb. I believe it's probably over the city of David. I really don't care if they take control of that room, just as long as they don't get the Temple Mount. Now, that's the Holy of Holies, literally where it was located. And let me get back on track here. Do you believe that we're going to see a return of the Inquisition? Do you believe that's what all this is heading towards? The Catholic Church trying to unite all the world's religion under a one-world religion, with the Pope riding this beast organization, if you will?
Yeah.
And maybe persecution coming for the true saints like you and I and others?
I absolutely think so. But, I think it's a little more subtle than that. I don't give them that much credit. Shannon, what I think, that really it's supernatural forces that are pulling the strings. It's not even necessary that these Catholic leaders even understand what's really going on. I mean, they might be pawns for all we know, but it doesn't mean that there's not a supernatural intelligence that is behind the conspiracy. And see, that's the way, I like to argue, people talk about the New World Order and, the Bilderberg Group. They talk about the Jesuits, the Black Pope. I mean, everyone has their favorite conspiracy theory, and then, most people that are skeptical of these kind of conspiracy theories, they say, well, I just don't think that, these people would be able to pull all that off and orchestrate all that. And, at the bottom line is they don't have to, the Bilderberg Group and the Jesuits and all these people don't have to even be talking to each other, because the New Testament tells us that we do not battle against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, against rulers, spiritual wickedness in high places. These are the things that are pulling the strings, and they do connect the Jesuits to the Bilderberg Group, to President Obama's office. These guys are behind the scenes of everybody, and they have an ear with everybody because they're fallen angels. They're archons. They're the cosmic creators. These are the ones that are really behind the conspiracy, and I think they are the ones that are behind the UFO phenomenon as well. And I present a pretty solid case for that in this book, based on biblical exegesis and ufology. I really draw a strong connection between the work of Jacques Vallée, a computer scientist who's been writing on the UFO phenomenon since the 1960s. He really has a very solid hypothesis that UFOs are part of a control system meant to manage the Earth. And if you look at, what the Bible talks about, it says that this world is in the power of the prince of the power of the air and these entities. And I think that they're really the ones. I think Jacques Vallée is right. He just hasn't connected the dots. And I kind of do that in this book. Now, just to close out, I know we're probably running over time a little bit, but, when I was talking about the origins of this Vatican Observatory.
Yes.
And I was talking about Father George Coignet. Now, this guy, he's an ardent evolutionist. He opposes creationism. He opposes intelligent design. It's really astounding, the sort of statements that you hear coming from these guys when they talk about science and faith, because they really divide the whole idea. I mean, they don't see any correspondence between their scientific work and their supposed belief in Christianity. I mean, these guys are supposed to be, Jesuit is supposed to be Society of Jesus, but it's really hard to figure that out when you see the sort of comments that they make about creation and people that believe in intelligent design. So he's been really out in the forefront in the media, attacking people that don't believe in Darwinism. And this whole idea of aliens is really intimately connected to Darwinism, because the whole system is founded on the notion that life is not special, that life just kind of happened by accident. And because it happened on Earth, and Earth is just one of many millions of planets out there, that there's no reason why it didn't happen on another planet too. And, that being the case, we should expect the universe to be teeming with life. And this is the sort of reasoning that's behind this whole quest of astrobiology. Now, just a few days before the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope went into operation, Coignet went out and gave interviews, and this was in October of 1992. Okay, so this is how far back this stuff goes. Now, there was an article where he gave an interview to the London Daily Telegraph. Now, this is not a National Enquirer or something. This is a conservative newspaper with a good reputation. And as far as I can tell, this is a serious interview. And I'm just going to read you a few lines of what this said in 1992. It says, "The Vatican sets evangelical sights on outer space." Quote, "The Roman Catholic Church is to team up with America's space agency to look for life in outer space and spread the gospel to extraterrestrials. Jesuit priests who run the Vatican Observatory near Rome say they're joining forces with NASA to hunt for UFOs and signs of life on planets and solar systems similar to Earth's. NASA's job will be to monitor for alien communication signals. The Vatican, which has helped to build a new reflector telescope in Tucson, Arizona, would search for planets displaying the conditions for life. Should intelligent life be found, Father Coignet said, quote, "The Church would be obliged to address the question of whether extraterrestrials might be brought within the fold and baptized, end quote.
Baptized an alien?
Absolutely. And this is in 1992.
Goodness.
And this was like 2 days before that facility went online. Okay. And of course, this created a firestorm in the media, especially with all the controversy over Mount Graham, and all the people that were protesting the violations of the environmental laws and everything. So, what was he thinking, to say all these things? Well,
I mean, does the Vatican really believe that these Greys are brothers from another mother?
It seems that way. I'll just challenge the listeners out there. Just type the word extraterrestrial and then baptize into a search engine and hit search, and you're going to have thousands of hits come up, and most of them are going to be articles with various Jesuits. Cosmonauga, who Tom was talking about a minute ago, who we interviewed, he said that he would baptize an extraterrestrial. Father Coignet was the first, and that was back in 1992. But this has been an ongoing thing. There's been like 5 or 6 different Vatican astronomers who have made these claims in the media. It's like they're intentionally seeding this idea into the public consciousness. Now, why are they doing that? I don't know. I mean, it almost sounds tongue-in-cheek. I mean, it's hard to take them seriously, but they literally are serious. And some of their theologians, Thomas O'Mara from Notre Dame University, and Nisi is another Opus Dei theologian, and I take a lot of their statements and analyze them and go back and forth with them some in this book. But these guys have absolutely laid some theological groundwork where, I mean, the way they want to argue it, if you don't believe in ETs, then you're a heretic.
Chris, I take the view that you do, that UFOs do exist, but what they are is sightings of fallen angels in the cosmos. These are demonic spirits, folks, okay? I don't believe we have life on another planet, although I do believe the theory that there was once something going on some of these other planets. In your research, Chris, did you come across anything that would lead credence to a view I heard many years ago that the asteroid belt is actually the fragments of a planet that God destroyed at one time?
I've heard that. And, there's some people that also think that maybe there was some sort of civilization on Mars.
Because, there's that reference to Rahab, and it was like kind of, maybe God smote it and blew it into smithereens, and it's just floating out there now. What was on the planet is the question.
Yeah, there's absolutely, I think there's room for, to posit an idea that maybe the angels, had some kind of civilization where, sometime or another the angels rebelled, and Satan became opposed to God. And we aren't really given any details about when that happened, but we know it had to happen somewhere between verse 1 of Genesis and, verse 3 or 4.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of time that's unaccounted for, and we don't have all those
gap
details.
Theory, if you will.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there is room for that, and some of that could have occurred on another planet.
I have no doubt in my mind that there's something more to it out there, folks. You have these sightings of pyramidal structures on the moon and Mars, matching what we've got on Earth. There's been a lot of that put out there. Very interesting, in fact, that the Vatican is paying a lot of attention to the stars out there, that they put a lot of money and effort into it. And, back to the Jesuits for a moment. These aren't guys that are unlearned. You have to actually go to an additional 10 years of study beyond, I think, what it takes to become a priest, don't you?
Yeah, I think there's different kinds. Like Guy Cosmonauga, who Tom was talking about. They call him a brother. Now, he's not the same as he's not a father. He's a brother. So he's not a priest necessarily. He's actually got his PhD in astronomy and planetary science. So there's different sorts of Jesuits. Some of them are priests, and then they get extra training, like you're saying. And then others are a lot of these guys that we've been dealing with are hardcore scientists. And, the kind of science that they're trained in is, very secular. And they really are in strong opposition to any kind of creation beliefs or intelligent design. And I'm I'm kind of an apologist for the intelligent design movement. I think that there's a lot of scientific merit to it. So I actually have a whole chapter dealing with the science of astrobiology and why the Earth is absolutely unique in the cosmos, and this whole idea that we are mediocre and, that there's nothing special about life on Earth. I think that I challenged that in a deep way, and I think that I did a pretty good job in refuting a lot of their assertions. This whole idea of Darwinism has always been very opposed to biblical theology, and it's almost a separate issue. People talk about, well, God could have used an evolutionary process, but if you look at the way they parse Darwinian evolution, it's totally incompatible with the idea of creation in that it's fueled by randomness. The whole thing is driven by natural selection, this idea that, the strong survive and the weak ones die off, and it's all completely depends on random things, on random mutations. Now, you can't have something that's intentionally designed. If God had something in mind when he started the process, there's no room for randomness in that equation. It's either designed or it's not, So the whole idea of theistic evolution seems incoherent to me because...
Brother, I think it's laughable to think that we came from a monkey or a tadpole. Folks, that's just laughable. There's no question about it that there is a God, and I can tell you there are demons too. We've talked to them. These are evil spirits out there. There are fallen angels working in the cosmos. I'm right in agreement with you, Chris. And I really believe that's what people need to be focusing on, is the fact, not who are all the players in the conspiracy. You can know all about their individual, mechanisms, but I want to go up to the top. I mean, that's the bottom line. Who's pulling the strings? And you hit it right on the head tonight. We've got fallen angels. We've got Satan himself, Lucifer, if you will, that are, controlling what is going on at this very moment. Do you think it's uncanny that there was a lightning strike on the Vatican?
Yeah, I don't think that was an accident. I think that was the Lord telling us to pay attention. That something's going on.
I saw Satan falling like a lightning bolt.
Yeah. I mean,
like lightning.
A lot of people have brought that verse up. Yeah, that's.
Chris, a lot of people think that the devil, has a pitchfork and, he's red and he's down in hell at this moment. But you know what? The Bible doesn't match up with that theory.
No.
It says that he's the accuser of the brethren, day and night. He's got access to the heavenlies, okay, to the throne room, if he's going to accuse you and I day and night before God. I do believe, and this is my own personal opinion, that the time where Satan is cast down is at hand or not too far off, because at some point in time he must lose his ability to access the throne room, and he's cast down knowing that his time is short, and that's when all hell breaks loose, and we got the real war of the saints coming. And I think that could be very close at hand if it hasn't already started to begin. I want to throw a bonus round question to you. In your research, have you come across any contacts that could tell us what the Vatican has in its possession in its library? I hear that there are stuff that will never hit the light of day. In fact, that they have the largest occult library in the world. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what you're talking about is probably the oldest surviving organization in the world. I mean, you can trace them back to at least 500 AD or something like that, probably older, probably 300. So, you're talking about an organization that's had its structure and infrastructure in place that whole time and has been collecting data from all over the world. I mean, they literally have representatives in every nation now, and so the sort of record keeping and data gathering abilities that they have are unprecedented. And you're talking about over 1,500 years at least. There's an attorney, Daniel Sheehan, who's involved in in ufology, who was actually one of the head attorneys for the Jesuits in Washington, D.C. He's a pretty well-known attorney. He's been involved in some pretty major cases and major litigation. He actually tried to get the records from the Vatican Library about UFOs, and they refused it. And President Carter was actually the one requesting it, and President Carter couldn't get access. So they have the information, and they're not revealing it. And what's really interesting, Shannon, I got to go here in a minute, but this connection between the Vatican and UFOs goes a lot deeper than I've been able to even touch on. Of course, it's in the book, but I mean, there's really good evidence that UFOs have actually dictated theology that all Catholics are bound to believe. And I'll just give a quick example of that. I mean, this whole thing about Fatima, Portugal in 1917, this thing they call the miracle of the sun. Well, I found a picture of that. It's a gray disc in the sky. I mean, it's not the sun. It's gray. It looks like a gray ball. Jacques Vallée found testimony where people said it wasn't even a sphere, that it was actually a disc. And it gave out all these rainbow colors, and then it flew into the sun. And they call this the miracle of the sun. Of course, the sun did not move in the sky. If the sun were to move, the gravitational forces alone would destroy the Earth. So obviously it's not the sun. Well, what I found was that the Pope, 50 years later, the Pope who promulgated the doctrine of the Assumption of Mary, this was in the 1950s, they have a new doctrine that all Catholics have to believe, that Mary assumed bodily into heaven, just like Jesus did in the book of Acts, that Mary ascended into heaven. Okay, so this didn't become an official church doctrine until 1950. Now, why? Well, reading a letter from the Pope, he said that he was in the Vatican garden and he was thinking about this. This was kind of a legend within Catholicism. It really was not a doctrine that everyone had to believe, but he liked it. He believed it. And while he was sitting in the Vatican garden, he saw a ball fly in the sky above the sun, and it danced around. And because he saw this UFO, he got inspired to promulgate the doctrine of the Assumption. So literally, this doctrine that all Catholics are bound to believe, that Mary ascended into heaven, was inspired by a UFO sighting by the Pope.
Oh, my goodness. Final question comes out of the chat room. Any comments on the third prophecy of Fatima and Islam? Is there a Islamic Catholic connection maybe in the works? I find it interesting that, in Revelation it talks about the saints that were beheaded. And I think, the modus operandi of execution, beheading, clearly Islam. It's 1 billion people strong. You've got the Catholic Church, on the other hand, though, that seems to be taking prominence and control and maybe spearheading a one-world religion. Do you think that there's any backdoor agreements taking place between Catholicism and Islam, maybe to merge them, or the Pope to come on the scene, this false prophet, and say, we're all worshiping the same God, even the Muslims? And maybe a exchange of power, if you will?
Well, the way I see that is, for something to unite the world, to unite Islam and Catholicism and all the other world religions, as a matter of fact, Buddhism, everything else, it's going to take something huge. Now, I think that's the power of this idea that there's going to be a great deception that claims to be something extraterrestrial. Now, another option is the Marian apparition, because the Muslims seem to have a lot of theology about Mary as well. They seem to kind of be willing to accept some of this Marian stuff. So it might be kind of a combination of the two, but I think it's going to take a nonlinear event, something that just is so huge that it's just like it blows people's worldviews.
Are we talking UFOs landing on the White House lawn?
Something like that. What Tom and I are arguing basically is that because there are so many different worldviews, and, a lot of the world is very scientific, and they're skeptical about any kind of religious or supernatural claim. But then you have people that, you have all the Muslims. So you have all these different worldviews. But I'll tell you, something that claims to be extraterrestrial could encompass all of it. Because, the scientists would fall in line because, they're already looking for it. And then all the different religious believers would fall in line as well. I think that I think the mythos is in place in society. The groundwork has been laid. There's kind of this myth that it's been going on since the 40s that, the world is on the verge of atomic destruction. North Korea is threatening us with nuclear weapons. Well, there's this idea that the aliens have been monitoring us to keep us from nuking
the Earth stood still?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, all these ideas are in the culture, and people have this idea. I mean, there's plenty of people in the UFO community that think that UFOs are watching the nuclear weapons so we don't kill each other. And so there's this idea that we're going to be saved from above, and that's a religious notion if you think about it. I mean, all religions kind of look to the sky for a savior. So I think that it's going to be a great deception, and it's going to be a claim of an extraterrestrial. So Tom and I aren't arguing it's a real extraterrestrial. We're arguing that it's a deceptive entity claiming to be one, and that's going to be the fuel that brings all this together.
I want to thank you for going in overtime. I promise, last question. Have you come across Project Bluebeam in your research?
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I know about it. It's really when they were planning to invade Cuba, they were going to put like a laser show above the island of Cuba that was going to be the second coming of Christ, and they thought all the Christians would freak out and not pay attention, and they could sneak the army in underneath them and take over Cuba. That was the plan for that. So, some people think that maybe, somehow the power elites or something like that is going to do a staged, second coming or something like that. That's a live possibility. I'm not sure that the military hasn't already done something like that. I mean, maybe some of these massive UFO sightings have been psychological warfare. I don't know. That could be a part of it. And the thing is like I was saying before, even if that is a major component in this, our idea that it's going to be something, deceptive that leads the world to believe in an extraterrestrial reality, that can encompass something like that because like I said, at the bottom line, it's not really, the people that we're doing battle with. It's these supernatural entities that are playing the people behind the scenes. They're the ones pulling the strings. So it could be the power elite, Project Bluebeam. I mean, that's possible.
The satanic cosmos, if you will. Were you able to identify any of the names of these archons in your research?
Oh, I don't have any proper names. No.
Okay, just curious, like Orion, things like that. Listen, I want to thank you for going in overtime. How can a person reach you and contact you and support the work that you're doing?
My website is logosapologia.org. That's LOGOSAPOLOGIA.org.
And can you be found up on Facebook?
Yes, my name is Cris Putnam, and you can friend me on Facebook, and I'll accept your friend request.
Hey, Cris, may the Lord Jesus Christ richly bless you, my brother. Thank you for coming on tonight. Looking forward to having you back on again soon, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shannon. It's been a pleasure.
Good night.
Good night.